Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The woman was unjustifiably happy in her marriage to a tyrannical husband. Despite everything, she stayed with her husband, raised their son, and cherished every family evening. But one day, the man came home with terrifying news. He was filing for divorce and leaving for his pregnant mistress. Betrayed, the woman was left without a home, and she and her son had to return to her parents' house. She had almost come to terms with the upcoming divorce and had even started reconnecting with her first love when, suddenly, her beloved aunt passed away from an illness. Crushed by grief, the woman didn't immediately notice the woe that turned her life upside down. Tina watched her husband with tenderness as he actively wielded his spoon. Scooping up another portion from the plate, Senor Vargas brought the spoon to his mouth. The process was accompanied by satisfied grunting, which only endeared him more to his wife. "Bino, maybe I should pour you another ladle?" Without lifting his eyes, the man mumbled something. Valentina jumped up from her chair and rushed to the stove. "I'll add some now, Bino." The head of the family cast a serious glance at his wife and barked. "I told you clearly, no need." The woman meekly responded. "Sorry, Bino, I didn't hear you." The man grinned maliciously. "Not only are you clumsy, but also deaf. You should wash your ears more often." This humiliating remark was followed by roaring laughter. Valentina timidly reproached her husband. "Bino, why are you like this? I didn't do anything wrong." The plate with the remaining soup flew toward his wife. With a sharp movement, the liquid splashed onto the table, and drops landed on Valentina's face and hands. But instead of an apology for his aggressive outburst, Senor Vargas pounced on her. "You're asking why? Fine, I'll tell you. I'm sick of this boring routine. You, Valentina, are like a spineless cold fish, and our house has turned into a stagnant swamp. I don't want to come back here, do you understand? My legs refuse to bring me here." Valentina barely whispered. "Bino, I don't understand what you mean." Under the influence of not the best emotions, the man jumped up. He paced toward the window but immediately returned to the table. Valentina shrank under his crazed gaze. Similar fits had been happening more often in recent months, and the woman feared that one day his anger would turn into something more terrifying. Senor Vargas probably feared it too because, enunciating every word, he said, "Better not touch me, Valentina. Better sit quietly or disappear somewhere so I don't see you. I won't say thank you, because your stupid questions have ruined my appetite. Thank God there's a place where I can eat properly." Clanking the glass door, the head of the family left the kitchen. The woman sighed with relief, but immediately heard her husband shouting at their son. "Paco, I don't have time for your math right now. Ask your mother, let her help you." From the depths of the apartment came a sound resembling a slap, and Tina realized that her husband had gone to the bedroom. The nervous tension began to fade, but tears welled up in her eyes. Sniffling loudly, Valentina started clearing the table. She didn't want to think about the bad things, but panic-filled thoughts buzzed in her head like a swarm of bees. "Your husband probably has another woman, that's why he's taking it out on you. You irritate him like an old torn slipper." Tina tried to push away the bad thoughts by focusing on something else, but this method provided only a brief respite, and within minutes, the unpleasant thoughts returned. "You try so hard, you appease him, and he just mocks you. And it's no coincidence that he hinted about a place where he eats well. You're fooling yourself if you think your submission will help keep the family together." Valentina truly believed that. For 10 years, the main purpose of her existence had been to preserve her family. In the first years of marriage, Senor Vargas had treated his wife more gently. He even gave Valentina flowers and small but pleasant gifts. However, this didn't happen as often as Valentina would have liked. But about 2 years ago, everything changed drastically, and it was as if Boris had been replaced. Valentina tried to understand the reason for these changes and came to the conclusion that it was all because of her husband's work. "Bino is just exhausted from work, that's why he's in a bad mood. I shouldn't pay attention to his rudeness. Mom always said that kindness can achieve more than force. But time passed, and the gentle approach didn't work. Senor Vargas was gradually turning into a household tyrant, and not only Valentina, but also their only son, Paco, suffered. The miserable woman, left alone with her sorrowful thoughts, tried to find the root of the problem in the past. In the early years of their marriage, the young family had lived in a small provincial town. Senora Vera, Valentina's mother, had given them her apartment. At the time, she had advised her daughter, "Valentina, anything can happen in life, and I want you to be protected from any trouble. Having your own home will allow you to feel secure and independent. And I want to give you one very useful piece of advice. When making serious decisions, never rely solely on emotions. Sometimes you act recklessly, and that worries me." It was the happiest time in the young woman's life, so not all of her mother's words reached her consciousness. Tina only asked, "Mom, do you think I'm doing something wrong?" Senora Vera replied with sadness, "You're too trusting, and that's not always good." Valentina realized that her mother disapproved of the fact that Bernardo made all the decisions in their little family. "Mom, didn't you once say that a real man should take responsibility for his loved ones? I believe my Bino is exactly that kind of person, and I trust him completely." Senora Vera sighed and said, "It's good that you trust your husband, but it's bad that your strong feelings prevent you from seeing the situation objectively. Forgive me, but I think you're putting Bernardo on a pedestal." Tina interrupted her mother irritably. "Mom, you're wrong. Everything is equal between us, and he always listens to my opinion." Senora Vera didn't argue anymore, she just smiled sadly. "I hope I'm wrong." As she had promised, her mother transferred the apartment to Tina, then moved to another region to live with her older sister, Felisa, who had been inviting her for a long time. Senora Vera's gift was met with great enthusiasm by Bernardo. "Tina, I admire your mother. Not only do we not have to wander through rented apartments like others, but in the future, we can sell this place." Valentina was slightly surprised that Bernardo was making plans regarding her inherited property. To avoid angering or upsetting her husband, she cautiously asked, "Bino, why would we sell this apartment? What's wrong with it?" The man winked at his wife. "I didn't want to tell you yet, but since we're on this topic, I'll have to reveal a little secret that might soon become reality. In my company, big changes are coming. They're shaking up all the management. A well-informed person hinted to me that my candidacy is being considered at the regional level for one of the leadership positions." This stunning news made the young woman forget everything else. Senor Vargas's appointment to an executive position coincided with another significant event, the birth of their son. The man was elated by his success and assured his wife, "Valentina, this is just the beginning. Mark my words, in less than 5 years, I will be promoted again. We will move to a big city and live like civilized people. But most importantly, our son won't have to waste his life in this godforsaken town. In the 4 years I've spent here, the only meaningful event was meeting you. Everything else has been nothing but a dull routine." After such a confession, Valentina felt like she was soaring even higher. Her husband's plans were impressive, as she, too, had long wanted to experience city life. Once again, the young woman praised herself for making the right choice in the past. For a long time, she had been courted by her aunt's foster son, Tobias. That kind-hearted young man had hoped for her affection, but then Bernardo appeared and shattered his young rival's dreams into pieces. Vargas had captivated the provincial girl from the very first day, and within just 3 months, as they used to say in the old days, he led her down the aisle. Senor Vargas slightly miscalculated the timing of his new appointment, as the higher-ups decided to begin the restructuring of regional divisions sooner than planned. The strengthening of the organization led to a change in legal status. The company became a limited liability company, and it was now led by Senor Vargas himself. He couldn't feel the ground beneath his feet. The joyful news was intoxicating. He came home and, for the first time, spoke down to his wife. "This is what it means to know how to achieve your goals. You, Valentina, wouldn't understand, because you're used to just going with the flow. The woman gazed at her husband with admiration and nodded silently. She had created an idol and placed him on a pedestal with her own hands, yet she felt no remorse for it. They had only a few weeks before the move. Immediately after his appointment, her husband was provided with company housing, but the two-room apartment in an old building did not satisfy Señor Vargas. "There's no space here, and I need a separate office for work." During the first 5 years of their marriage, the couple had managed to save a substantial sum, as they both earned well. Therefore, when her husband very persistently asked her to sell the apartment her mother had gifted her, Valentina agreed. Señor Vargas presented several strong arguments in favor of this decision. "Tina, just think about it. Your apartment is sitting there unused, you don't want to rent it out, yet we still have to pay utility bills from our family budget. If you believe that one day we'll have to return to that miserable town of yours, forget it. Your husband is not the kind of man who moves backward." The apartment sold quickly. Since Valentina didn't understand anything about such matters, her husband's cousin, Julia, offered to help. At that time, Tina was expecting another child. Following her husband's and his sister's advice, she signed a power of attorney in Julia's name. However, the stress and anxiety caused by the sale negatively affected her health. For a long and agonizing month and a half, Valentina was hospitalized on bed rest. She followed all medical recommendations and strictly adhered to bed rest, but despite these measures and the doctor's efforts, she suffered a miscarriage. After losing the child, Tina struggled to recover. Concerned about his wife's condition, Señor Vargas called her mother. Señora Vera arrived the very same day. She was horrified when she learned that her daughter had sold the apartment. "What have you done? You don't even realize what a mistake you've made. I hope this new apartment is registered in your name?" The young woman shrugged. "Honestly, Mom, I don't know. And to be frank, I wasn't really thinking about that. What difference does it make whose name is on those damned square meters?" Señora Vera replied sharply. "You need to think ahead, not just live for today. Has it ever crossed your mind that there might come a day when Bernardo leaves you or you leave him? That happens all the time." Tina felt hurt by her mother's words. "If I understood you correctly, you just wished for our divorce?" Valentina burst into tears, and Señora Vera rushed to comfort her daughter, cursing herself for her careless words. A few days later, her mother left, as Aunt Felisa needed her care. Felisa had been seriously ill for a long time and required her sister's help. Tina also tried to visit her whenever Bernardo allowed. The restless swarm of troubling thoughts scattered in different directions. Even a brief return to the past brought some peace to the woman. She walked into the child's room and helped her son solve a difficult math problem, then went to the bedroom. She was surprised to see that her husband wasn't sleeping, as he usually did at this hour. On the contrary, Señor Vargas was freshly shaved and dressed in his formal suit, the scent of expensive cologne wafted from him. Valentina looked at her husband in confusion. "Bino, it's the middle of the night. Why are you all dressed up?" He looked somewhere above her head. "Tina, I've been thinking for a long time, and I've decided that this can't go on any longer. Just today, I lost my temper again. It's really hard for me to explain everything to you, but it happened. I fell in love with another woman. I've decided to file for divorce because I'm afraid of losing her." After saying this, the man exhaled with such relief, as if he had been carrying a sack of cement on his back and had finally dropped it. "That's basically all I needed to say to you. I hope you understand." Valentina barely managed to whisper, "What does she have that I don't?" Her husband answered without hesitation. "Her? She's a fairy, a queen. And you, excuse my bluntness, are just a primitive woman. Forgive me, but I haven't been interested in you for a long time." She wanted to scream that not long ago, he had called her a fairy too, that he had told her she was the only woman he always wanted to be near. There was so much she wanted to say to the man she had once placed on a pedestal, but all the words stuck in her throat, and her body froze in shock. Tina heard the front door close quietly, without its usual harsh slam. She still could have stopped him, could have fallen to her knees before him. Valentina even ran out of the bedroom, but she stopped in the hallway because she realized it was already meaningless. So much negative energy had built up that there was no strength left to neutralize it. After a sleepless night, Valentina felt completely shattered, but the previous storm of emotions had subsided. There was an emptiness inside her, as if a tornado had swept through her soul. Realizing that she wouldn't be able to work in such a state, she called the owner of the private company. "Senora Godoy, I'm not feeling well. Could you give me a day off today?" The businesswoman responded with understanding to her chief economist's request. "Of course, Valentina, take the day off. Is there anything I can do to help?" Valentina hastily reassured her employer. "Thank you, Senora Godoy, I'll manage on my own." The woman inquired further. "Are you having some problems?" Tina smirked. "Nothing serious, just everyday routine." She didn't want to share details of her personal life with outsiders. She considered calling her mother for advice, but discussing such matters over the phone wasn't her style. Suddenly, she remembered Julia, Bernardo's sister, with whom she had, if not a close friendship, at least a very warm relationship. Julia answered her call immediately. "Tina, you won't believe it, but I was just thinking about you." Vargas's mood lifted slightly. "Really? What for? Do friends need a reason to meet? We haven't seen each other in ages, and I just feel like having a little gossip session." Even over the phone, Valentina could sense Julia's positive energy. She didn't want to immediately dump her troubles on a relative, so she latched onto Julia's last remark. "I wouldn't mind a gossip session myself. And I have a rather interesting topic for discussion." Julia took the bait. "Tina, I'm dying of curiosity. Tell me where and when we're meeting. Maybe you could drop by my place this evening?" "No, I won't be able to wait that long. Come over to my office right now. I'm alone, so we can talk without any eavesdroppers." Tina hadn't even had breakfast, she was in such a hurry to meet Julia. She couldn't explain to herself why she was so eager to share her troubles with her husband's sister. Perhaps, in difficult times, what people call empathy kicked in. Deep down, she admired Julia, so she hoped that she would understand and sympathize with her. But those hopes dissipated like smoke the moment Valentina told her about Bernardo's confession the previous night. Julia didn't even let her finish. She made a displeased grimace and said in a dismissive tone, "And that's it? That's what you wanted to surprise me with?" Valentina was taken aback, not so much by the words as by the tone in which they were spoken. "Julia, maybe you didn't understand. Bernardo insists on a divorce, and I'm not ready for this at all." Lucero smirked again. "So what? Everyone gets married, then divorces, then gets back together again. Thank God, I've been spared such a fate. But I'm prepared for it at any moment, because all men are unpredictable, and my husband is no exception." Valentina muttered hopelessly. "But I'm not ready. For me, this news is like a natural disaster. I still think that Bino was just joking." Lucero gave her a condescending look. "What a country bumpkin. Do people joke about things like that? Usually, wives catch their husbands red-handed, but for the cheater to confess, now that's a rare occurrence. Judging by this, my dear brother is really in love. That's the only explanation for his behavior." Tina felt invisible needles piercing her body in different places. The sensation was very unpleasant, and she instinctively shuddered. "Julia, what should I do?" Lucero unexpectedly raised her voice. "Are you seriously that clueless, or are you just playing dumb? Closing the barn door after the horse has bolted? You mean to say that everything is lost?" Lucero laughed. "The penny has dropped. The only thing you can do now is quietly leave." This suggestion puzzled Tina even more. "Leave? Where to?" Julia rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Go to your mother, she won't refuse to help you. And leave Bernardo alone. You might not like what I'm about to say, but if you love someone, you should do everything to make them happy. That's exactly the situation you're in now. Believe me, scandals, tears, threats, or begging won't help. I'm telling you this not as Bernardo's sister, but as a lawyer. After nearly 20 years in practice, I've seen it all. I don't want you and Bernardo to sink to the level of throwing insults and accusations at each other. Never lose your dignity. Valentina sighed. So you're telling me just to leave? And how do I explain this to Paco? His interests should be considered too. Julia made a face, and from her demeanor, it was clear that she was growing bored of the conversation. To get rid of Valentina, she waved her hand dismissively. Oh God! Why do people always bring up the kids? What kind of interests does a 9-year-old boy have? And besides, Bernardo isn't abandoning his son. He will support him, take him on vacations. And honestly, if raising a child is such a burden for you, Bino can take Paco himself. Valentina froze as a realization struck her. Julia, you knew about his plans all along and kept silent? And here I am, pouring my heart out to you, looking for understanding and sympathy. Lucero lowered her gaze. Sorry, Tina. Yes, I've known for a long time that Bino had a new woman, but I didn't think things were that serious, so I didn't tell you. Don't think that I approve of Bernardo's affairs. But you must understand, no one can force an adult to love a specific person. Anyway, let's not dwell on this. Let's switch to something more positive. Listen, I saw this gorgeous blouse in a boutique yesterday. Valentina gave her a long look, said nothing, and left the law office. Stunned by Julia's confession, she walked home, unable to comprehend how she had kept silent about her brother's affairs. In her mind, Valentina reproached herself for being so trusting. So many years she had considered Julia a friend, confided in her, and yet she had failed to see the wolf in sheep's clothing. Indeed, everything looks different from a distance, but once you get closer, the picture changes drastically. Despair clutched her throat again, but Valentina forced herself to fight it back. She commanded herself. No, dear. You can't let yourself fall apart. Think of your son. That thought gave her strength. Glancing at the wall clock, she rushed to the kitchen. Soon Paco would be home from school, and she had nothing prepared. About half an hour later, the door slammed. Mom, I have something amazing to tell you. From the hallway came the familiar sounds that told her all the lessons in manners had paid off, and her son had taken off his shoes. Soon, he appeared in the doorway, his face beaming with a happy smile as he triumphantly reported his school achievements. Mom, I got an A on my homework. I also got an A in history. And math, better than ever. Turns out, you're pretty smart with numbers. And Dad said all you're good for is making soup. Joy radiated from the boy, but the woman asked indifferently, What else did your father say? The boy didn't have time to answer because, at that moment, the front door slammed again, and from the hallway came a cheerful voice, Is everyone home? Very good. Bells rang in Valentina's soul, and her heart fluttered like a bird from excitement. She stepped into the hallway and looked at her husband with hope. Bino, you're home early today, but I've almost finished cooking. Just 10 more minutes, and lunch will be ready. The man hesitated. Thanks, but I've already eaten. I just stopped by for a minute to tell you something. The head of the family threw an annoyed look at his son, who had run into the hallway behind his mother. Paco, get out of here. Your mother and I need to talk. The boy pouted in disappointment and, lowering his head, trudged back to his room. Valentina reproached her husband. If you don't care about me, at least have some pity for your son. Senor Vargas smirked. Just spare me the lectures. And it's not in your best interest to ruin our relationship right now. In short, I won't waste my breath, I've filed for divorce. Sorry, but circumstances are forcing me to speed up the process. Afraid to raise her eyes, Tina whispered. What circumstances? Senor Vargas brightened up. Erna, my future wife, is pregnant. That means Paco is going to have a little brother or sister soon. It felt as if an invisible hand had clenched her throat with all its strength. Valentina wanted to say something, but only a pitiful sound escaped her chest. Senor Vargas looked at her with pity. Tina, I'm sorry it turned out this way, but you and Paco can stay here for now. Technically, I'm not abandoning my son, and he can live with me and Erna if you need time to get settled. Her foggy mind couldn't process the meaning of his words. Bernardo, I don't understand. You're acting like you're doing me a favor by letting us stay in this apartment. I'd really love some clarification because it's interesting to hear you say that you're allowing me and our son to stay in a place that, by the way, was bought with my money. Senor Vargas froze for a moment, his eyes widening, then let out a nervous chuckle that grew into laughter. For the first time in 10 years, Valentina felt hatred for the man she had once considered nearly perfect. Why are you twitching, like a fish out of water? He gave her a condescending look. Tina, if you're trying to make me look foolish, don't waste your energy. Like a fish out of water, that's you, not me. But you brought up the housing issue at just the right moment because we need to deal with reality. And the reality is that, as of today, I am the sole owner of this apartment. If you don't believe me, ask Julia. After all, you were the one who entrusted her to handle the paperwork back then. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the documents with me, they're all in the case file. A buzzing filled Valentina's ears. So you're saying that you two tricked me, taking advantage of my helpless state? Senor Vargas rolled his eyes. Oh, don't exaggerate. No one tricked you. It was just that time was short, and you happened to be in the hospital. So Julia and I had to use a little deception, that's all. My sister, using the power of attorney you gave her, registered the apartment in her name, and 6 months later, she gifted it to me. By the way, you signed all the documents yourself back then. Don't you remember? Memories from 5 years ago started surfacing. Indeed, Julia had visited her in the hospital several times, bringing papers for her to sign. At that time, Valentina was preoccupied with far more important concerns, so she had signed everything without reading. Her mother's warning suddenly came back to her, and she burst into tears, cursing herself for being so trusting and her husband for his cruelty. Back then, 5 years ago, Bernardo had been far more concerned with his promotion to a managerial position than with family matters. When Tina lost their child, she even felt that he was relieved. At the very least, he hadn't grieved. For a whole week, Tina wandered around in a daze. But as they say, time heals. She slowly began to accept that divorce from Bernardo was inevitable. However, she couldn't come to terms with the fact that she and her son would practically be left without a roof over their heads. After much hesitation, she decided to confide in her company's owner. Senora Godoy was a self-made woman. She had carved her own path to success, but had not grown callous. Listening attentively to Valentina, the boss shook her head. Well, Valentina, that's a tough situation. I'm not an expert in legal matters, but I don't think there's a favorable solution for you. If you had caught on earlier and checked the documents, then maybe you could have challenged this in court. But 5 years have passed. Senora Godoy picked up her phone. I'm calling a very reputable lawyer. After a few rings, a velvety baritone answered. Godoy, glad to hear from you. The businesswoman winked at Valentina and replied to her acquaintance. Senor Romero, you're always with me in spirit. I just don't want to bother you unnecessarily. But today is a special case. I need help for a very good woman. Yes, she works for me. All right, thank you for agreeing. Hanging up the phone, Senora Godoy turned to Tina. After lunch, Senor Romero will be expecting you. His office is nearby. You can get there in 2 minutes. Valentina headed toward the door, but her boss stopped her. Tina, do you want my opinion? Vargas nodded in agreement, and Senora Godoy said what she had been thinking. From what I can see, you're in a hopeless situation. You'll wreck your nerves, but you're unlikely to win in court. And you'll have to spend a lot of money too. What should I do? Her boss gave her a faint smile. Live and enjoy life. For now, take a vacation, visit your mother and your aunt. She's sick, isn't she? Tina nodded, and her boss concluded. From my own experience, I know that when you're surrounded by loved ones, any grief seems less daunting. When you come back, we'll figure something out with housing. Her employer's willingness to help was unexpected for Valentina. It lifted her spirits a little and made her see the situation in a new light. But it was still painful to realize that she had lost her parents' apartment through her own foolishness. Her father had sacrificed his health on the construction site to earn those precious square meters. Her mother had done everything possible and impossible for her beloved Valentina. And their love-struck daughter, right after the wedding, had registered her husband in the apartment without thinking about the consequences of such a step. And now she was paying the price for her carelessness. The consultation with the well-known lawyer did not reveal anything new. Senor Romero said honestly, "There is practically no hope of proving your right to this property. But if you are prepared for long legal battles, you can gather all the documents. However, I must warn you, significant emotional distress is unavoidable. If you are ready for this, I can prepare a counterclaim." Tina remembered her boss's words and realized that she was not ready for such an ordeal. She also recalled her wise employer's advice to take a vacation. There were only a few days left until the end of the school year, and Valentina decided that now was the perfect time to take a break. Paco was thrilled when he learned they were going to visit his grandmother's. "Mom, that's awesome. When we were at Grandma's in winter, she promised to buy me a bike, and Uncle Tobias said he'd give me his smartphone." At the mention of Tobias, Aunt Felisa's foster son, Valentina felt a pang in her chest, a clear sign of strong emotions. They were in the middle of packing when Senor Vargas graced them with another visit. Seeing the suitcases and bags, he looked surprised. "Have you already found a place to live? You didn't have to rush, I'm not kicking you out. And you, son, can stay in your room, you have school and your friends here." Paco shot his father an angry look and muttered through clenched teeth, "I'm not a traitor. Live with your Erna yourself, I'm staying with Mom." Senor Vargas turned to Tina. "So, you've already turned our son against me? Fine, let that be on your conscience. I stopped by to personally hand you this notice." Valentina took the thin envelope, which contained a summons for an upcoming court hearing. In an ingratiating tone, the man requested, "Tina, of course, you can rebel and not show up, but I have one big favor to ask, don't drag this out. Either way, I'm not coming back to you. As they say, love has faded, and the roses, or tulips, have wilted, can't remember." Apparently, Senor Vargas was in high spirits if he was recalling old song lyrics. And that infuriated Valentina. "Bino, you think too highly of yourself. Time to come down to earth. I doubt your Ella or Emma will worship you the way I did. But honestly, I don't even care anymore. I will definitely show up to court. I want to cut this Gordian knot as soon as possible." Senor Vargas stared at her with undisguised surprise. It seemed he hadn't expected such defiance from her. Since there was nothing more to say, he left without a word. They traveled to the small town with the fairy tale name Milagros using different transfers. Although Paco had visited this provincial place many times before, he was filled with excitement. "Mom, how long are we staying at Grandma's?" Valentina answered definitively, "I don't know yet." Paco kept going. "Mom, if Grandma Taya really buys me a bike, how are we going to take it back home?" She tried to keep her growing irritation in check. "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." He accepted the answer but still had many other questions. "Mom, do you think the kids still remember me?" His question puzzled Valentina. "What kids?" Paco's lips curled into a smug smile. "When you and Dad sent me to Grandma's last year, I made friends with the local boys. At first, they were giving me a hard time, but then Uncle Tobias showed up and told them to leave me alone. Valentina was surprised. Really? You never told me about that before. Her son lifted his chin proudly. I'm not a mama's boy to go around complaining. And besides, we became friends. Crespo let me ride his bike, and Fausto taught me how to cast a fishing rod properly. Esther is cool too, she doesn't act stuck up like some girls in my class. When he mentioned the unknown girl, Paco's voice wavered slightly, and Valentina suddenly remembered how more than 20 years ago she had felt incredibly nervous when she first saw a strange boy in Aunt Felisa's house. Tina only knew about her grandmother, Charlie, from photos and stories told by her mother and aunt. Rosalia had been a hard-working woman who, after the tragic death of her husband, had raised 2 daughters on her own. Her grandfather had been struck by lightning while herding livestock. The storm came suddenly, so he hadn't had time to find proper shelter. And as Aunt Felisa always said, he couldn't abandon the animals entrusted to him, and that cost him his life. Our father was a very responsible man. If he made a promise, he always kept it. Everyone in the village respected him. And when tragedy struck, people helped us. But our mother never recovered from his death. She was sick for a long time but refused to go to the hospital. Then she passed away, and Taya and I were left all alone in the world. Aunt Felisa was 12 years older than Tina's mother, so after their grandmother Charlie passed away, she took on the role of a mother to her little sister. Despite a hard life, Felisa had managed to get a decent education for that time. She completed teacher's college. She was assigned to an orphanage in the regional center, where she worked until retirement. Later, when her younger sister was old enough, Felisa insisted that she pursue an education too. But Tina's mother chose to become a merchandiser. Shortly after graduating, she married the cheerful and lively Guido Bustos. Tina's father convinced his young wife to move to another region, where he worked in construction. Her mother often told her how her father had dreamed of building his own city. He had even come up with a name for it, Guidodad. For a long time, they had lived in a communal apartment, but eventually, her father received a housing permit for a separate apartment. Tina remembered how they had celebrated that day as if it were a holiday bigger than Christmas. Friends and neighbors brought small gifts. Someone brought a chair, someone a nightstand, someone a set of bed linens, but those modest presents were the most valuable ones. That housewarming day had been a day of true happiness. But Guido's joy didn't last long. Not long after their noisy housewarming, he started getting seriously ill, and doctors discovered that he had an advanced stomach ulcer. Twice, he underwent treatment at a health resort, but mineral waters and a strict diet didn't help. He died just a few months before his 40th birthday. The ulcer had caused internal bleeding. The first person to come to share their grief was Aunt Felisa. She helped her sister with the funeral and stayed for a few days to support them. After the memorial service, the sisters were cleaning up in the kitchen, and Tina overheard her aunt speaking to her mother. "Taya, I'm not superstitious, but it's as if our family is cursed. Our father died before he turned 40. I lost my husband early too. And now fate has struck you. I feel like we need to do something about it. I don't want this tragic pattern to continue with Valentina." The girl heard her mother respond. "Felisa, please don't be so gloomy. I don't believe in all that nonsense. It's just a ridiculous coincidence. And does it even matter when the person is already gone? I just can't imagine how I'm supposed to live now." Her mother started crying, and Aunt Felisa tried to comfort her. "Sister, you know I won't leave you alone. Let Valentina stay with me for a while. You're still so young, and you'll surely meet a good man. You have a chance to start a new family, unlike me." At 10 years old, Tina didn't understand much of the conversation between the women, but the idea of staying with her aunt excited her. Encouraged by this thought, she didn't pay attention to her mother's reply. "Clara, how will your foster son react to Tina's arrival? Forgive me, but I don't have the best impression of orphanage children." Felisa sharply disagreed with her sister. A single bad experience from your childhood doesn't give you the right to judge all of them. Children don't end up in an orphanage by choice, and many of them have already been crushed by fate. My Tobias is one of them. He grew up in a wealthy and well-off family. His father was a businessman. But there were monsters who couldn't stand to see someone else succeed. I won't go into details, but a gang murdered his entire family, including his elderly grandmother. The only reason the boy survived was that he managed to hide in a built-in closet. The killers were in a hurry and didn't have time to check it. It's a miracle my Tobias is still alive. Senora Vera was deeply affected by the story. That poor child. Losing his entire family at once, that's something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Tina also felt deep sympathy for the unknown boy. She suddenly had an overwhelming desire to meet him and do something kind for him. She stepped out of her hiding spot and ran to her mother. "Mommy, can I stay with Aunt Felisa for a little while?" The sisters burst into laughter at the same time, and her mother scolded her. "You were hiding and eavesdropping?" The girl blushed. "Mom, I didn't mean to. You were talking loudly, and I overheard." Tina expected to see a small, timid boy, but Tobias turned out to be a handsome boy 2 years older than her. He immediately gave her a compliment. "You're pretty, even better than in the photos." Tina felt a rush of heat from embarrassment and mumbled, "You're handsome too." That was the beginning of their childhood friendship. Over time, it became clear that Tobias was very well read. He could talk for hours about major wars in human history and royal dynasties. Valentina would listen with her mouth slightly open, afraid to even move. But books weren't his only passion. Tobias practiced martial arts, understood technology well, and had even repaired Aunt Felisa's washing machine by himself. There was one more thing that made Tina feel proud. Many girls liked Tobias, and they often looked at her with envy. One of her friends once blurted out, "Bustos, you've already got a future husband, no need to look for one when it's time to get married." At that time, Valentina was only 13, the age when girls start dreaming about their own prince. No matter how strong her friendship with her aunt's foster son was, Valentina never saw him as that prince. As fate would have it, she stayed at her aunt's house for several years. Senora Vera had tried to start a new family, but her second attempt was unsuccessful. She went through another heartbreak and decided to bring her daughter back home. Valentina didn't want to leave her aunt's cozy home, but her mother insisted, and she couldn't refuse. Back in her hometown, she started missing her friend terribly. She called Tobias almost every day, and they would talk for hours. Then one day, he came to visit her. Tina remembered that meeting well because her childhood friend had acted strangely. He stared into her eyes for a long time and then, completely unexpectedly, kissed her. Valentina was outraged. "Tobias, what do you think you're doing?" He stood there, smiling sheepishly. "I kissed you because I like you." For some reason, his confession offended her. She shouted, "I thought you were different, but you're just like everyone else. Leave and never come back here." Tobias left. He didn't write or call her again. The only updates she got were through Aunt Felisa, who mentioned him during phone calls with her mother. My Tobias got into a programming school, and everyone at the institute praises him. He even won some competition. Senora Vera would then relay the conversation to her daughter, but Tina would just scoff. "I don't care about Felisa's Tobias." She was busy preparing for her own university entrance exams when her aunt called again, this time with bad news. She had been admitted to the hospital. Since Senora Vera couldn't leave work, she sent her daughter instead. "Go, Valentina, stay with your aunt for a while. She's done so much for us." Although reluctant, the young woman went. Once there, she discovered that Aunt Felisa had a serious illness that required long-term treatment. Felisa refused to believe the doctors. "I know my own body. This will pass like a common cold." But her illness dragged on for months, then years. Despite the difficulties of university, Valentina visited her aunt every week, hoping to brighten her days. Aunt Felisa was deeply grateful for her attention and care. She always tried to give her money. "Valentina, take some money and buy yourself something nice. You're young, and you should dress well." The young woman constantly refused, and one day, in a moment of honesty, her aunt blurted out, "Neither you nor your mother know that I'm actually quite wealthy. I inherited something from my late husband, and I've managed to save up a decent fortune over the years." Valentina didn't pay much attention to her confession. "Give it to Tobias, I don't need anything." Felisa looked at her thoughtfully and said, "Tobias is already well off. He's a good man. Honestly, I thought you two would end up together, but everything is in God's hands. The only thing I can tell you is that you can't run from yourself, just like you can't run from fate." Tobias also visited his foster mother often, but he and Tina only crossed paths at the house once. After that, their lives took separate paths. Tobias moved abroad for work and wasn't even able to attend her wedding to Bernardo. Valentina had only been away from her aunt for a few months, yet she was shocked by how much Felisa had changed. Senora Vera noticed her daughter's concern. "You came just in time. The doctor said Felisa doesn't have much time left. I called Tobias too. He should be arriving today or tomorrow." Of course, in such a situation, it would have been inappropriate to bring up her divorce from Bernardo, so Valentina decided to hold off on that news. Aunt Felisa passed away on the third night after their arrival. With all the funeral arrangements falling to Tobias and Valentina, they spent the entire day traveling between Milagros and nearby towns in his car. Since Tina knew nothing about modern cars, she simply asked, "That must be an expensive car?" Tobias smiled his open, sincere smile. "Expensive, very expensive, but luckily, I can afford a little luxury." The woman asked another leading question. "You must have married the daughter of a rich boss, right?" The smile vanished from the man's face, and he sighed. "Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to get married. I don't have time for a personal life." After a moment, he added, "And besides, I'm a one-woman man." Tina decided not to ask any more provocative questions, and the situation wasn't exactly suitable for heart-to-heart conversations. After the funeral, there were many pressing matters to handle, and once again, they ran around different institutions in town together. Only once did Tobias unexpectedly ask, "Are you staying here much longer?" Tina was surprised. "Why do you ask?" The man looked at her intently. "We met again under unfortunate circumstances, and I'm afraid we'll lose touch for a long time again. I don't want that to happen. That's why I'd like to invite you and Paco to my place." The woman spread her hands in disappointment. "Unfortunately, I don't think that will work. We have to return to the city. Believe it or not, but my divorce is on Monday." Tobias hadn't expected such a confession from his childhood friend, and he was genuinely shocked. "You talk about your divorce so calmly, as if you go through this process every week. And why didn't you tell me about it before?" The woman replied with a bitter smile. "I kept thinking it wasn't the right time. And as for being calm, I've just gotten used to the idea. At first, it seemed terrifying, but now those fears seem ridiculous." Tobias noted, "Yeah, life is a strange thing. Sometimes it throws such surprises at you that you don't know where to run. If you don't mind me asking, what's the reason for the divorce?" Felisa never stopped talking about how happy Valentina was and how wonderful her husband was. Valentina said with irony, "A good husband is a relative concept." The man realized that further questioning was pointless and changed the subject. For a few more days, Valentina and her son stayed in Milagros. Senora Vera persuaded them to stay longer, and Tina finally had to tell her mother about the upcoming divorce. Senora Vera wasn't surprised. "I knew it would end like this. Your Bernardo is too cunning." Tina corrected her mother. "He's not mine anymore." My place has now been taken by Erna, whom he worships and calls a fairy, while he called me a hag. Senora Vera was outraged. He should take a look at himself first. Once they had packed their things, Valentina delivered her final news. Mom, don't faint, but Paco and I are basically homeless now. Senora Vera froze in shock. Homeless? What about the apartment I gave you? Valentina had to explain the whole divorce story in detail. Senora Vera didn't hold back her words against her former son-in-law, and her daughter got her share of scolding too. After calming down, she said, "Don't despair, my daughter. Your Bernardo and his sister will choke on their stolen wealth. Life has proven this again and again. But you won't be left with nothing. Felisa left me her house and her will, and she left you money. You're a millionaire now." Mentioning her late aunt brought tears to the young woman's eyes. That poor woman had taken care of everyone. Senora Vera hugged her daughter and whispered softly, "Tina, listen to your mother. I wouldn't give you bad advice. Maybe you shouldn't push Tobias away. I think he's still in love with you." Valentina rolled her eyes. "Oh, Mom, that's just your imagination. And anyway, I'm not planning to get married again for at least 5 years. I don't want to go, as they say, out of the frying pan into the fire." But deep down, Tina was trying to convince herself rather than her mother. Tobias's reappearance in her life had stirred something long forgotten and tender. So when Tobias mentioned his invitation again, the woman didn't hesitate to agree. "Fine, Tobias. But first, the divorce, then the visit. I hope you'll support your childhood friend in this difficult moment." Tobias promised solemnly. "As a true friend should, I'll be waiting for you outside the courthouse." The court hearing dragged on, and Valentina found herself wishing it would just be over already. After all, a fantastic evening at Tobias's estate awaited her, and deep inside, she felt that he intended to offer her a chance to reclaim the bond that had once been broken in their childhood. Lost in these pleasant thoughts, the woman didn't hear what the judge was saying. Only when the gavel struck did Tina realize that she was now free from marriage. She hurried toward the exit, but Bernardo caught up with her. "When are you going to remove the rest of your things from my apartment?" Valentina looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Your apartment?" Senor Vargas said with noticeable satisfaction. "Yes, my apartment. And the court confirmed it, so any further attempts will be useless. I'm asking, no, demanding that you clear out of my legal residence." Valentina smiled. "Fine, I'll try. But that will only be possible in a few days, as I'm quite busy right now." Senor Vargas scoffed. "What could someone like you possibly be busy with?" With the same charming smile, the woman replied, "At the moment, I'm looking for a new place to live. I can't decide whether to buy an apartment or a house. What do you think, Senor Vargas?" Vargas smirked. "You're messing with me. What money do you have to buy property?" "Bino, I'm a millionaire now. Aunt Felisa left me a hefty inheritance." Senor Vargas froze in shock. Valentina cast him a casual glance and ran down the courthouse steps toward the bright red Challenger that had just pulled up. Behind the wheel of the expensive car sat the man with whom she wanted to start a new life. Senor Vargas was stunned by what he saw. He rushed down the stairs, but the luxurious car, with his ex-wife inside, had already driven away. Erna ran up to him. "Bino, so you're officially divorced now? When will we get married?" Vargas snapped at her, his voice filled with anger. "Leave me alone, you fool. Maybe I don't want to get married anymore." 3 years had passed. Tina had invested the inheritance from her aunt into a business. However, she didn't dare to start everything from scratch and instead offered herself as a business partner to Senora Godoy. The woman gladly agreed. Since both had extensive experience, the business flourished. To ensure even greater success, they divided responsibilities. Senora Godoy managed the production process on site, while Valentina searched for new partners and buyers for their products. On her way back from yet another business trip, Valentina felt something was off with her car. The service center she usually used was too far away, so she decided to stop at a workshop near the city entrance. An elderly mechanic with silver hair looked at her car with admiration. "That's a beast of a car, miss. How do you manage it?" She responded. "We've gotten used to each other." The mechanic nodded. "I see. Let's take a look at why your stallion is acting up." He glanced to the side and called out in a loud voice. "Bino! Vargas, get over here. We've got a job for you." From the back room emerged a tall man in overalls. At first, Valentina didn't recognize the aged man as her ex-husband. He barely glanced at her before turning his eyes away. "What's the issue?" From his tone and manner, Valentina realized that Bernardo didn't want to acknowledge that they knew each other. She, too, pretended not to recognize her former husband. In just half an hour, the minor issue was fixed, and Tina was back on the road. As she drove away from the workshop, Bernardo watched her go, but Valentina felt neither pain nor regret in her heart.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.